Well, good morning. It is Thursday, April 2nd, and we are doing history. And I'm going to read history with you today. And so if you get your history book out, turn to page number 259. So 259 in history, and let's read it together here. Harding and Coolidge, Warren Harding. Before World War I, the progressives had united around Woodrow Wilson. After the war, they could not unite around a candidate. Some of the issues that united them had already been turned into law. Progressives have won a constitutional amendment that banned selling alcohol as a beverage. They had also gained the right for women to vote. Other issues divided progressives. They divided over entering World War I. They divided over the League of Nations. Populist farmers believed that the progressives had failed to help them, so progressives and populists divided. The Republicans chose Warren Harding as their candidate. He promised a return to normalcy. Americans were ready to return to a more normal life. Many Americans were weary of progressive reforms. They did not think that reforms were good for the nation. Harding also promised to pursue policies that would help businesses grow. When businesses grew, more people had jobs. This promise sounded good to most Americans. Harding won the election of 1920. President Harding appointed some very capable men to serve in his cabinet. For instance, his Secretary of the Treasury, Andrew Mellon, was respected. Mellon served Harding in the next two presidents. Mellon had Congress lower taxes. He also worked to pay off the World War I debts. His policies are credited with helping businesses prosper in the 1920s. However, Harding also appointed close friends to serve in his cabinet. These men turned out to be corrupt. The country did not know about the corruption, but while he was on a trip to the western part of the country, President Harding died. Harding was a very popular president when he died, but then the country found out about the corruption. Several cabinet members had taken bribes to make themselves rich. Harding was soon one of the least popular presidents. Now go back to the previous page. Talking about Harding himself, says he was a competent newspaperman. During his presidency, he carried a printer's rule in his pocket for good luck. And it says that Harding's wife, Florence, burned many of his papers after his death. Historians think that she did this in hopes of preserving his reputation, which of course was ruined by his cabinet. All right, so on to Calvin Coolidge now. Calvin Coolidge, Harding's vice president, became the new president. Coolidge kept Harding's business-friendly policies, but Coolidge avoided scandals. Coolidge was known for his honesty. He was also known as a man of few words. Look at Silent Cal there. It says Silent Cal did not speak often, but he had a good sense of humor. Sometimes he would play jokes on his bodyguards by ringing for them and then hiding under his desk. The president and the first lady had a pet raccoon named Rebecca. Now, I bet you none of you have ever had a pet raccoon, but he was able to have it. And one of the interesting things about one of our presidents, a friend of Calvin Coolidge told this story. A burglar broke into the president's room while he stayed at a hotel. The president persuaded the burglar not to rob him, loaned the burglar $32, and later received the money back. Pretty interesting story. Andrew Mellon, move up there to him. Andrew Mellon believed that the United States needed to pay its debts. Coolidge agreed. Mellon also thought the government should reduce the percentage that Americans paid in taxes. Mellon had a new theory about taxes. He pointed out that Henry Ford made more money by lowering the price of his automobiles and selling them to more people. If Ford had kept the prices high, fewer people would have bought his cars, and he would have made less money. Mellon believed the same thing would be true about taxes. If the government taxed a lower percentage of people's money, the people would have more money. If they invested that money in businesses, then businesses would make more money. In the end, the government would receive more money by lowering the percentage Americans paid in taxes. Coolidge was happy about the idea of lowering taxes. He was not happy that Mellon's idea would bring more money to the government. Coolidge worried that Congress would be tempted to spend that extra money. He thought the government spent too much money already. Coolidge found all sorts of ways for the government to spend less money. Government papers had been tied together with red tape. Coolidge said that the string would do just as well. The mail had been carried in blue and white striped sacks. Coolidge said that purchasing plain sacks would save money. Coolidge was careful even about how much food was served at the White House. He wanted to make sure that everyone was careful to spend government money wisely. Now, this is what you would expect a government to do. Unfortunately, this is not the way that things are handled. This type of a thought about spending wisely, there's a word for it. It's called frugal, or being frugal, or having frugality. And Coolidge was definitely a very frugal president, and he was very careful about spending money. And I think his character probably was part of the reason for that, as far as his honest character, not wanting to cheat people. Government was not there to take money and to spend it. That's exactly what happened in this bill that was just approved by the president, but trying to help the economy because of the coronavirus. And there were several. It was held up in the House because several of the Democratic leaders and Democratic Congress people wanted special money for special things to be able to spend on in order to fight the economic depression of the coronavirus. And so that you may hear about that, may have heard about that, but they actually did approve some of that, only because if they didn't, then Congress would not have passed the bill. And they were fighting, they were holding it, and the president and others felt that we really needed this stimulus money in order to be able to help our economy. We'll see what happens in the long run, but that is a common practice nowadays, is what I'm saying. Coolidge sent Mellon's tax plan to Congress. Congress did not lower taxes as much as Coolidge wanted, but taxes were lowered. Mellon's predictions came true. The government brought in more money that year. Coolidge asked for lower taxes the next year as well. Coolidge also wanted to roll back many of the regulations that the progressives had put in place. There were still progressives in Congress, so Coolidge did not succeed in this goal. Nonetheless, his policies helped businesses. The 1920s were, for the most part, a decade of prosperity for Americans. There was one exception. American farmers found life difficult. They could not sell their crops for as much money as they had in the past. Farmers had a hard time paying their loans. Some suggested that the government buy and store extra crops. Then prices would rise. Coolidge did not think the government was permitted to do this. He suggested that some Americans should move out of farming and into other businesses. This solution would help stop overproduction. Most Americans liked Coolidge. They liked the prosperity they enjoyed under him. He had served the remainder of Harding's term. Americans elected him for a second, and they would probably have elected him for a third. But Coolidge said, I do not choose to run for president in 1928. He thought the precedent of presidents serving only 2 terms was good. He thought keeping power in the hands of one person too long was unwise. Well, tomorrow, or actually next week, we'll be reading about Herbert Hoover, who became president after Coolidge. He was not a very popular president, and it mostly wasn't his fault. But we do find that during this time, he receives the most of the blame for what is coming in 1929. Well, that's it for today. You do have a couple of work text pages. In fact, they are pages 185, 186. So hold on a second, and let's look at those. And so this is a study guide that goes from pages 252 to 261. Now, this study guide, if you do this study guide, you will be good for a quiz. Now, this quiz, I didn't write it in here, and I'm not going to give it next Monday, but I will give it next Tuesday, but it's going to be covering pages 252 through 261. And so using this study guide for that is going to be a big help to you. So get that study guide done. That'll be a good study tool for you. I will give you an idea of what questions you'll need to know for that quiz for next Tuesday on Monday. And so that is your assignment for today for history, and have a wonderful weekend.